Charles's words affected the students deeply. People in the modern era, before the apocalypse, had grown accustomed to blithely changing jobs and employers when better opportunities came along. This mindset had become deeply rooted in society and would not change easily. Charles understood that it was inefficient and short-sighted to use the promise of benefits or the threat of power to ensure loyalty. In this post-apocalyptic world, there were countless cases of people betraying loved ones for a few bites of food. Many would not hesitate to kill their superiors for less. It made no sense for Charles to suffer the difficulties of recruiting and nurturing subordinates if there was the possibility of them breaking away when a seemingly more attractive path presented itself. He could kill them for their lack of loyalty, but that would gain him nothing but a certain grim satisfaction. It was far more difficult to go back to square one and start fresh with new recruits. Besides, would anyone be willing to follow a leader who frequently changed his subordinates? His credibility as a protector and leader would be compromised. The 3 questions he asked the students were a test. If his subordinates wanted to leave him after considering the questions carefully, it would mean that he had failed as a leader and forfeited his right to oppose Leonard Shaw, his sworn enemy, or take his revenge. Charles set up a grill he had taken from the kitchen appliances factory and prepared breakfast. An off-road vehicle stopped before their campsite. A window rolled down, and a woman's surprised voice said, "There's food here, and it's hot." 3 men and 2 women exited the vehicle and regarded Charles's grill with eyes that glowed with hunger. Hugh Weatherby, Tommy Schrader, and Tina James instantly became alert. They had just fought a bloody battle over food the previous night, and now more people had appeared to covet their provisions. They took this possibility of a threat very seriously. One of the men, pot-bellied and wearing a suit, took a thick wad of currency from his briefcase and tossed it to Charles. He said proudly, "Take this as payment for the meal. Keep the change. I don't like money." The fat stack of bills made a strong visual impact. The students gasped involuntarily. Charles didn't fault them. They had been conditioned by society to react in this way to money, and such conditioning was hard to shake. Charles looked at the currency in his hand and smiled. "Just in time. I needed that." As he spoke, he threw the stack of money into the bonfire. The paper money was very combustible, helping the firewood burn more vigorously. When Charles had said that he needed it, the man in the suit had smiled smugly as the women beside him looked on admiringly. Using money to control a situation had always been his favorite thing to do. He particularly enjoyed the way others would bow and scrape before him when he flashed large amounts of cash. However, in the next moment, his ruddy cheeks went pale. This lunatic had actually thrown his money into a fire? What kind of operation was this? His stunned face then quickly flushed with anger. "What do you mean by this? Are you trying to humiliate me? Or do you think it's counterfeit?" Charles examined at the burned notes and said seriously, "White ashes. It is real money." His calm attitude angered the man even more, making him feel confused and embarrassed, as well as offended. He protested loudly, "Do you understand what you've done? Don't you understand the importance of money?" One woman said, "Let me tell you, even in the fortress, there is a shortage of resources. Without money, what will you use to buy things?" The other woman said, "Look at you poor wretches out here in the woods. You dare to look down on us?" Looking at their flustered and exasperated faces, Charles found the situation funny. It was true that there was a shortage of resources at the fortress city, but the collapse of currency had been swift. Even with a whole carload of $1,000 bills, you wouldn't be able to buy much. You could only swindle the dim-witted, who still believed in the illusory worth of money. Charles wondered how much food this pig had cheated away from credulous souls swayed by the sight of greenbacks. What other precious resources had he traded his worthless bills for? Charles still looked serious. "Your money is certainly useful. It makes for terrific kindling." The man in the suit was infuriated by Charles's blasé attitude. He said to the driver and the bodyguard behind him, "Teach him a lesson." "Ah! Ah!" The driver and the bodyguard screamed. 2 screams rang out as Charles effortlessly dropped them to the ground. They lay there, their bodies hunched in pain. Charles retracted his foot. He had provoked them on purpose because he needed an off-road vehicle. If he were to simply take it by force, his subordinates would lose esteem for him. He had to establish a legitimate claim on the car. However, since the other man didn't know what was good for him, there was no need for Charles to be polite about it. What do you want?" The man in the suit took 2 steps back as he spoke. Charles was much stronger than he had imagined. His enforcers were actually not very good at fighting. Most of the time, they bullied people backed by their employer's position of power. The people who were bullied simply did not dare to fight back. Now that he was in a situation where his power was useless, the man in the suit finally started to be afraid. Charles said, "As the price for offending me just now, I will confiscate your car. Just treat it as compensation for my mental suffering." The man in the suit protested angrily. "Don't even think about it." Charles grabbed him by the throat, his eyes filled with killing intent. "I wasn't asking for your opinion. I was just informing you." The man begged fearfully. "No, don't kill me. I'm the head of a Fortune 500 company. I have hundreds of millions in assets and many people under me. When I get back to my company, I'll reward you handsomely." Charles sneered. "You don't think this world will continue to operate like before, do you? Do you still naively believe that those assets of yours still belong to you? Wake up. You own nothing." Witnessing Charles's aggressive defiance, the 2 women's faces were filled with panic, but their eyes betrayed a hint of excitement. They were accustomed to following the man in a suit and enjoying the fruits of his wealth. But Charles's domineering manner had an animal appeal. The man in the suit could give them money, but he could not offer them any other enjoyment. If Charles were to take an interest in them, they might not necessarily refuse. Alice Thompson's vigilant eyes narrowed. Charles already had 2 great beauties by his side. Could he be so greedy that he would be tempted by the charms of these haughty interlopers? In fact, Charles was not interested in the 2 women. He understood the value of what he already possessed. The only reason he didn't kill these fools outright was to teach his students a lesson. The man in the suit's eyes were full of fear. What are you talking about? What are you implying?" Charles had cruelly revealed what the man did not want to think about. It was not that the man in the suit did not understand this dangerous world. He just tried his best to foster the illusion in the people around him that social order could be restored. As long as his acting skills were good enough, he could rope in a group of followers. He would beguile them with talk about better things in the future. In this way, supported only by a fantasy, he was still the boss. "You don't talk about that anymore," the man in the suit yelled. Charles's classmates thought back to what had happened at the kitchen appliances factory. The first thing that the worker who had awakened his superpower had done was to kill his boss. They watched Charles carefully, absorbing his lesson. Charles said to them, "I must take their car, but I will leave these people to you. Don't bother trying to guess what I'm thinking." As he spoke, he kicked the man in the suit's leg, causing him to scream in pain and negating the possibility of escape. Then, as if nothing had happened, Charles went back to his cooking, waiting for the 3 of them to act. The eyes of the man in the suit and his consorts stung with humiliation, but there was nothing they could do. The 3 students looked at each other. This must be Charles's test for them. They did not know what would happen if they failed, but they knew it wouldn't be anything good. Tina looked at the 2 mature and coquettish women, then said, "If we do not have a very skilled driver among us, then let's keep the driver. The rest of the people, we leave." She saw no advantage to adding any rivals for her male classmates' attention. The 2 women put on pitiful expressions. Charles's back was now to them, so they looked at the 2 male students with pleading eyes, trying to gain their sympathy. Hugh hesitated and said, "Why don't we leave the boss behind and take the rest?" Tommy looked at the off-road vehicle and said, "If I'm not wrong, this car should be able to fit 8 people." The 2 male students really wanted to take the 2 beautiful women along. After what had happened the previous night, their desire for carnal pleasures had become even stronger. But they did not want to leave a bad impression on Charles. They could not tell if Charles was also interested in the 2 women, so they didn't dare to directly express their feelings. One woman said in a seductive voice, "Hey, handsome, if you decide to bring me along, I am willing to do anything." Alice felt the hostility rising in her heart as she fixed the temptress with an unfriendly gaze. The driver said, "I can help you drive. My driving skills are very good." The man in the suit shouted, "And leave us in the wilderness? What's the difference between this and killing us?" He knew that many people were squeamish about killing even a chicken, let alone other people. This bunch looked just like students. Although their temperaments had undoubtedly undergone some changes, in the end, they were probably still good kids. Tommy nodded as if he agreed with him. The man in the suit was overjoyed. He was about to take advantage of the situation and scare them with a speech about the consequences of violating the law. But he himself was scared out of his wits when Tommy said, "After we leave them behind, they will hold a grudge against us. We might as well just kill them." Charles cut the meat and handed it out to the students. Then he handed the driver a piece of meat and a bottle of water. "This is for you. It's payment for helping me drive," Charles said. The driver's stomach growled as he smelled the aroma of the cooked meat. He could not help but say, "I accept." He had just seen a few medicinal zombies as corpses in the vicinity. If he refused Charles's offer, how quickly would he join their number? Charles handed each of his 3 students a bottle of water. His meaning was very clear. Whether these things were to be consumed by them or used to recruit the others, it was up to them to decide. When the off-road vehicle set off again, 2 people were left behind. "You bunch of devils! You will be sorry!" the bodyguard yelled. "This is too much. I'm going to sue you!" the man in the suit added. The boss and the bodyguard watched the back of the off-road vehicle as it continued down the road. After cursing them again, they sat on the ground, their faces full of despair. The man in the suit noticed 2 bottles of water on the ground, alongside 2 pieces of bread. His eyes lit up. The bodyguard followed his gaze, and his eyes lit up as well. A dangerous look settled on his face. "Charles, do you have any problem with their decision?" Alice asked. In the end, the 2 male students couldn't leave the 2 women behind. The price had been the food and water in their hands. Although Tina was angry, she could not persuade the 2 of them to abandon the women. Of course, they could not kill anyone. Despite everything, they were still a little tender. Charles said nonchalantly, "It's okay, you don't have to worry about those details. The 2 men we left won't live much longer." Alice was shocked. "What did you do?" Charles said, "I didn't do anything. Bread and water were left for them, enough for 2 people. But in a place without a town or a shop, who wouldn't want to take it all for themselves? The outcome will depend on the loyalty of the bodyguard." Tina had left the bread and water. He would not be bothered to puzzle out the true motivations in Tina's heart. He did not have the energy, but what she had done was in line with his expectations. Tina was now sitting in the passenger seat up front. Charles, Alice, and Sylvia were sitting in the middle seat of the vehicle. The 2 male students had squeezed in with the women in the back, delighting in the promise of intimacy the women projected. Because Charles was also in the car, they did not dare to make too much noise. However, this made them even more excited. Tina saw the scene in the rearview mirror of the car. Killing intent appeared in her eyes, but she hid it very well. After they had traveled for a while, the sky suddenly turned dark. After stretching his head out of the window and looking at the sky, Charles said, "A thunderstorm is coming. Find a place to shelter from the rain." He was used to encountering trouble along the way. He feared he would lose the car he had just obtained if they didn't continue to move forward. In any case, there was not much distance left between here and home. It would not be too late to leave after the thunderstorm had passed. At worst, they could set off at night. At this moment, they were pleasantly surprised to see a gas station. However, when they approached, they discovered that the staff had turned into zombies. They had apparently eaten and transformed some customers as well. The driver was about to speed on when Charles ordered, "Stop the car." The driver hesitated. "But there are more than a dozen zombies here. If we stop, we will be in danger." "If you don't stop now, you will be in far worse danger," Charles threatened in a very calm tone. The driver felt a chill run down his spine. He suddenly thought of the zombies around the camp. If those zombies had been taken care of by this person on his own, perhaps he had the ability to deal with these zombies too. And if he couldn't, the driver could take advantage of the zombies as distraction when they ate Charles and quickly drive away. Before the car completely stopped, Charles was out the door. Alice wanted to follow, but Charles lightly pressed her back into her seat. Who will win? The driver wondered nervously. In his opinion, these were definitely dangerous people. If he could join this group, perhaps he wouldn't have to be afraid of the dangers outside. Just as he took off his seatbelt and opened the car door to get out, he realized that the zombies had already been neutralized. So fast. What happened just now? The driver thought. The driver's mind reeled. What exactly had happened just now? He had clearly seen a dozen or so living zombies, but in just the few seconds it took to exit the car, all of them had already collapsed. He looked at Charles with fear in his eyes. With such speed, was he really human? Charles instructed his 3 students, "Watch the car, don't let him drive away." He did not hide his vigilance toward the driver. His strength had already reached peak Tier 2. After fighting the medicinal zombies just now, there were already signs of another breakthrough. Tommy immediately said, "We'll look after the car." The storm arrived. Charles took advantage of this downtime to combine the 9 essence spirits in his body. Because of his previous life's experience, there were no obstacles to this breakthrough. It was a smooth process. When the 9 essence spirits gathered together, a small metaphysical space opened in his mind. This was the Essence Mansion. Within this Essence Mansion, there were unlimited possibilities. Charles could not help but feel excited. This indicated that his strength had increased by another level. He could now gather more resources and use more divine abilities. If his luck held out, he would be able to come and go freely in most places in this world. Meanwhile, as he was cultivating, something was happening to his team. As Charles walked into the convenience store in the gas station, Tommy and Hugh couldn't wait to kiss the 2 women. The women had teased them in the car, but Tommy and Hugh hadn't dared to act rashly. Now that Charles had left the car, they could no longer restrain themselves. Tina spat in disdain and left the car, taking the driver along with her. She wanted to keep an eye on the driver, worried he might get up to some mischief when they were not paying attention. Their moment came at last. Tommy was about to make a move, when the gorgeous woman next to him put her finger on his lips and stopped his advance. "Aren't you afraid that your boss will get angry?" she asked. Tommy replied, "What does this have to do with him? He didn't forbid us." The woman said, "That's not what I meant. I just wonder, being a new woman in the group, are you sure you want to make a move before he's had a chance?" Tommy and Hugh were stunned. They hadn't considered this. They could not figure out what Charles was thinking. These 2 women were indeed flirtatious. If Charles was really interested in them, would he be angry with the boys for acting presumptuously? Although Charles had rejected Tina, it hadn't meant that he was devoted to Alice. It just meant that Tina had not met his requirements. On the other hand, the new women were like Alice in terms of looks and figures, but they were made up and attired in a more aggressively feminine style. Maybe they were more to Charles's taste. The woman saw their hesitation and pressed. "One thing I've learned in this life, boys, don't get too big for your britches. Don't overstep. If you make him angry and he dumps you, what will you have?" Charles's approval was paramount. This was the guarantee of their survival. The woman said, "How about this? You give your boss some time to decide what he wants to do, and then we will help you get a read on his attitude toward you. We'll put in a good word for you." Hugh sat back in his seat and said weakly, "Go." Tommy also let go of the woman next to him. She patted him maternally on the shoulder. After 2 women left the car, the 2 of them looked at each other. Each saw humiliation in the other's eyes. They were being treated like children. It was a gross insult to their dignity as men. Buoyed by resentment, evil thoughts arose in their minds. If they could manage to take their boss's position, didn't that mean they had the right to do so? Wasn't that the law of the jungle? Hugh suddenly said, 3 conditions for betrayal." Tommy was startled. Then he remembered what Charles had said to them. If they wanted to betray him, they had to satisfy 3 conditions first. Hugh continued, "Although we have some strength, we are still at the bottom of the pile compared with the paranormals. We wouldn't last long in the outside world. So if we want to establish our own crew, the first thing we need is the ability to stand on our own. At the very least, we need to have the strength to deal with those monsters," Tommy added. After that, the 2 of them stopped. The 3 conditions Charles had proposed to them were like 3 invisible shackles. When they were prone to act impulsively, thinking through the conditions would restore some of their rationality. Now that they thought about it seriously, they realized that if they betrayed the group, they would have nothing left. However, if they followed Charles, their lives wouldn't be too bad. At the very least, they would have protection and hot meals to eat. Then, when they had gained enough strength, that would be the time for them to do whatever they wanted. As the 2 women left the car, they expressed their disdain. They indeed relied on their charms to make a living, but they were discriminating. If they were going to romance anyone, it would be the boss. This guy already has 2 foxy girls by his side. He's clearly not the monogamous type. It's not difficult to tempt him, but it's very difficult to trap him, the first woman said. At worst, we can just wait until we get somewhere safe and figure out a better arrangement for ourselves, the other woman said. That will be very troublesome. There will be more risks, the first woman said. How about this then? His current girlfriends are attractive enough, but one's a scold, and the other is a simpleton. He puts up with them because he has to. He has no other options. But if a couple of sweet, agreeable beauties like us enter the picture and our rivals exit, the other woman said. Good idea. How do we work it? The first woman asked. The 2 women bent their heads closely together as they conspired in low whispers. Then they began walking toward the convenience store. Alice immediately became alert and asked, What are you guys doing? One woman said sweetly, It's too cold outside, so we want to go in and warm up a little. Alice sneered and said, There are clothes in the trunk of the car. You can wear them if you feel cold. If you still feel cold, you can do some exercise. Seeing that the 2 of them were still undeterred, Alice frowned. I'm perfectly happy to toss you out of here on your rears. The 2 women each unfurled the clothes in their hands, clamping them over Alice's and Sylvia's noses and mouths in perfect synchronicity. Alice was caught off guard when her mouth and nose were suddenly covered. The eyes of the 2 scheming women were full of cruelty as they taunted their captives. Who are you to tell us where we can go? The first woman said. 2 little girls who haven't grown up yet. I'll teach you the facts of life, the other woman said. When you die, we will steal your man, the first woman said. Just as they reached a fever pitch, the attackers suddenly realized that their hands and feet were no longer within their control. Bands of coursing water held them fast. Superpowers. Is she a superpowered person? The first woman said. The 2 women were dumbfounded. They had thought that Alice was only a pretty trophy for her boss, but she was an extremely powerful paranormal. At the same time, a blinding holy light burst from Sylvia's body. 2 paranormals, the women cried. The treacherous women felt that the world had been turned upside down. Superpowered people were very rare. What were the odds of meeting 2 paranormals, and another so terrifying he had 2 superpowered people working for him? What kind of person was he? Their bodies shook. They didn't dare imagine the consequences of offending 2 superpowered people at the same time. They were certain that if Alice killed them, she wouldn't be punished for it. Sylvia's eyes were cold. People like them should go to hell. Hell is their only fitting home. She no longer had any thoughts of forgiveness toward those who were not worth saving. As far as she could tell, hell was empty. The real demons were in the human world. Alice said, Let Charles punish them. I don't care, Charles called from inside the store. If you're worried about them causing problems in the future, just kill them. If you think they are no threat to you, or if you don't have the heart to kill, just leave them here. He would never let those 2 women get in the car again. If he really wanted to punish them, he had many options. He knew that in the post-apocalyptic era, food and water weren't the only things that could be traded. Women, especially beautiful women, were valuable commodities. However, he still had his own moral limitations, which prevented him from seriously considering consigning them to such a fate. Alice wanted to kill them, but in the end, she hesitated. Facing these 2 people who had tried to kill her, reason told her that their deaths would be the best result. It would not be her first time dealing death, but her previous killings had all occurred in the heat of battle. Even if these 2 women deserved to die, did she really have the right to act as judge, jury, and executioner? If she crossed that line now, how bad would she be in the future? Once a person had no more bottom line, what terrifying things would they be capable of? Tina suddenly appeared with the driver and said, If you guys are hesitating, then leave it to me to handle. Alice hesitated for a moment longer before saying, Okay. Tina dragged the 2 women away, pausing at the car to demand the reluctant participation of her male classmates. Seeing Tina's actions, Charles's mouth curled into a smile. The girl had real potential. With this thought in mind, he returned to his seclusion in the store. The Essence Talisman had just formed, and it still needed to be consolidated. After about 2 hours, the sky finally cleared. Charles finished his cultivation and exited the convenience store. His Essence mansion had expanded by quite a bit. In addition to increasing his abundant vitality, he had also refined some talismans. The storage space in his body was now larger than an empty university lecture hall. The supplies he had accumulated thus far only filled a corner of this space. After experiencing the end of the world, when resources were at their scarcest, he had suffered from scurvy. Since he had returned to a more abundant time, why not take the opportunity to collect more things? After packing everything of use to be found in the convenience store, he also took gasoline from the gas station. Even if the car broke down, he could still make a hell of a fire should zombies come calling. When they set off again, there was a lot more room in the back seat. The driver's, Tommy's, and Hugh's faces were a little pale, and when they looked at Tina, their eyes were filled with fear. Charles, who was in the driver's seat, said, "Take a rest. I'll drive the rest of the way." Seeing Charles's confident driving style, the driver suddenly felt worried. Does this mean I'm useless? The driver wondered. They did not encounter any problems in this final stretch of the journey. All went smoothly on the way back to the town where Charles's parents lived. In his previous life, Charles hadn't encountered serious difficulties when looking for his parents. There were not too many hazards in the sleepy town. He worried briefly about the butterfly effect before putting the thought out of his mind. There should be no problem, right? Charles thought to himself. Then he took a deep breath and walked toward his own house. Seeing Charles's nervous expression, everyone suddenly felt that he seemed more like a real person. They had regarded Charles as a cold-blooded and heartless killing machine. Only now did they realize that he hid his feelings under a cold exterior. Charles parked the car some distance away from the home, so they would not be able to see Charles's and his parents' faces when they met. They could not help but feel a little regretful. Charles suddenly stopped and turned back. Alice asked doubtfully, "Why don't you go in?" Charles took Alice's hand and said, "Come in with me." Alice's face blushed red. Could it be that she was going to meet his parents? She was not prepared for this. Charles had always said that she was his woman, but she had always had doubts in her heart. Was she merely the object of Charles's desire, or was she his real girlfriend? When Charles held her hand and asked her to join him to see his parents, she no longer felt uneasy. In this chaotic world, having something real to rely on, it was overwhelming. "What, you don't want to?" Charles smiled. "Yes, of course I do," Alice quickly agreed. How could she be unwilling? This was her greatest wish. Sylvia felt a sense of loss in her heart, but in the end, she did not show it. Her master's will was everything to her. Whatever he wanted to do, she could only accept it. She didn't realize that this was one of the reasons Charles did not want to bring her to meet his parents. Charles's parents had often nagged about him bringing his girlfriends home. When he had dated Lara, he never had the chance to bring her around. At first, he had thought that Lara was shy, but later, he found out that she had disdained him. If he brought his two girlfriends home together, who knew how his parents would react? Furthermore, even if his parents did not care, they would be confused by a girlfriend who kept calling him master. Holding Alice's hand, Charles knocked forcefully on the door and shouted, "Dad, Mom, I'm back." He had already used his vitality to sense that his parents were inside. Hurried footsteps immediately came from behind the door. When Charles's mother heard her son's familiar voice, she wanted to see him as quickly as possible. Although there were not many dangers in the town, there were still some monsters around. Due to the interruption of all communications, his parents could not receive any news of their children. Finally hearing their son's voice, they were filled with sweet relief. The door opened, and Charles finally saw his parents' beloved faces, which made his eyes tear up. In his previous life, it was because of his naivety and ignorance, as well as his desire for revenge, they had implicated his father and made his father die for him. In the end, he had not protected his mother well. Now he had a chance to relive his life. No matter what, he could not let this life have such regrets again. Just as he was about to stretch out his arms to embrace his parents, Charles's mother suddenly took Alice's hand and said, "You are Charles's girlfriend, right? You are so beautiful." Charles's father shot a glance at Charles and said, "You finally brought your girlfriend home?" Then they eagerly pulled Alice, who had a confused look on her face, into the house. Charles asked, "What?" Why was this so different from what he had imagined? Shouldn't this kind of scene, in which he had finally returned home after going through so many hardships, be filled with teary embraces? What was their reason for leaving him outside the door? He could only shake his head helplessly and follow them inside. To him, the most important thing was for his parents to be happy. As he thought about it, a sweet smile appeared on his lips. Mrs. Federer pulled Alice by the hand, saying warmly, "Dear girl, I hear that there are monsters everywhere outside. You were still willing to travel back with Charlie? You didn't encounter any danger along the way, did you? If something happens to you, how are you going to explain it to your parents?" Alice said, "Don't worry, ma'am. Charles is very powerful. Those monsters outside are no match for him. I've only survived until now because he saved me." Mrs. Federer asked seriously, "Why do you call me ma'am, dear?" Alice probed. Mom? Ah. Mrs. Federer revealed a kind smile. The longer she looked at Alice, the more satisfied she felt. Alice's appearance and temperament generally made people feel good about her. But the fact that she was willing to come all the way home with Charles made them feel that she was really something special. Mr. Federer said, "We've been hiding here at home for a long time. Is it really that dangerous outside? Where's your family?" Alice said, "My family is in Dallas. It is safer there than most places. Charles promised me that we will return there in the future." Even if Alice hadn't been there, Charles would have to go to Dallas. It was a happy coincidence that Alice's parents were there. Mrs. Federer's heart ached as she said, "It must be really hard on you." Charles, who was left standing to the side, suddenly realized that he had become superfluous. But the atmosphere was too harmonious. He didn't have the heart to interrupt. Alice's heart was also filled with sweetness. She had long regarded Charles as the only person she could rely on in her life. Now that Charles's parents had accepted her so warmly, she was comforted by a sense of security. She felt even more strongly that she was truly part of Charles's family, and not just a plaything. Seeing that the three of them were settling in for an endless conversation, Charles finally couldn't help but say, "Dad, Mom, Lena is in the vicinity of Montreal. My intuition tells me that she might be in danger. The reason I came back is to bring you guys along to find her." He had no good way to explain how he knew about the insect swarm attack. He could only use the mystical connection between siblings as a justification. Mrs. Federer nervously replied, "Is Lena in danger? No wonder we are feeling so scared these days. Let's hurry." She had no doubts about Charles's words. They were all startled by the sound of hammering on the door. Charles's expression changed when he heard the insistent knocking on the door. Usually the people in the town were simple and honest. They were insulated from worldly affairs and did not easily become enemies with each other. However, this did not sound like someone arriving for a friendly visit. "Federer, get the hell out here!" It was a young man's voice. The arrogant tone filled Charles's heart with killing intent. No one had the right to insult his parents this way. Charles was about to answer the door when his father patted his shoulder and said, "It's just a small matter. We can settle it ourselves." He walked out of the room and opened the door to the front yard. A sloppy, blonde-haired young man, accompanied by several hooligans, said, "Federer, hurry up and return our things to us, now." Mr. Federer said, "What do I owe you? I'm in no one's debt. Don't try to talk nonsense." Yellowhair cursed. "Old bastard, do you think I don't know? You bought so many things before the accident, all the things we wanted to buy. I advise you to hand them over. Otherwise, I will smash your house and let the monsters eat you tonight." Charles came to the front door with sharp bone spurs in his hand. He had already sentenced these punks to death in his heart. Yellowhair looked at Charles with a strange expression. "Yo, your son is back. Good, he can help. It's only right for a man to pay his debts. Let me be clear. If you don't hand over everything you own, you won't be drawing breath tomorrow." Charles grabbed Yellowhair's throat and said, "I don't know if we'll live past tonight, but you won't be around to see the sunset. Let's go out and talk." He didn't want to kill anyone in front of his father, so it was better to find another place to settle this. Yellowhair's face was full of fear. He sensed that Charles could take away his fragile life with the slightest effort. The thugs beside Yellowhair clamored for his release. They were the kind of people who cared more about being disrespected than their own lives. "Let go of him!" one thug yelled. "I advise you to drop your hands quickly. You'll be sorry if you don't," another added. Charles let go with his right hand, but his left hand tightened around the bone spur. After Yellowhair was released, he started to say a few harsh words, but when he saw Charles's dangerous eyes, his Adam's apple jerked up and down, and he swallowed his protest. In the end, he cast a baleful look around the property. Then he resentfully left, taking his underlings with him. Mr. Federer sighed and said to Charles, "Look at you. You have the air of an experienced killer." A complicated look appeared in Mr. Federer's eyes. He then pressed his hand to Charles's chest, cutting off his son's response. "I know your temper. You definitely wouldn't attack someone for no reason, only someone who provoked you first." Charles nodded. Although his moral bottom line was a little lower now than when it came to killing people, it had always been others who had provoked him first. Mr. Federer said, "I've watched that child grow up. His nature is really not so bad. He's just watched too many TV shows about glamorous tough guys, and he wants to emulate them. These kids dye their hair like him just to be different from others." Charles asked, "Are you saying they've done nothing wrong?" Mr. Federer exchanged an awkward look with his wife, who had come outside to see what was going on. Charles had already seen the answer in their eyes. He and his underlings must have caused a lot of trouble around here since things went south. Do you think they will behave well as long as we forgive them? Charles's parents could not answer. In the peaceful world, before the apocalypse, they could indeed have given them a few years to turn over a new leaf. Even if they resisted, the pressure of society can make people behave. But in this era, was there really still time? This era would only turn good people into bad people. How could it turn bad people into good ones? Mrs. Federer said, "I won't get bogged down with principles. I just don't want anything to happen to you." Charles shook his head. He had seen too many of these hooligans. It wasn't enough to avoid provoking them. They bullied people just to feel alive. They would definitely bear a grudge. Unless he broke their arms and legs, they would be capable of anything for the sake of defending their so-called reputations. In the peaceful world of before, there were people willing to kill and die over petty arguments. What would they be willing to do now that they had nothing left to lose? Mrs. Federer said, "It's true. We bought too many things. We thought it was a powerful strain of influenza coming through. We never dreamed it could be so many times more powerful than that. Forget it. Enough talking. Let's hurry up and leave." She was afraid that Charles would continue to clash with the youths. It was not something she wanted to see. Charles nodded, then, following the lead of his parents, he put all the things that the two of them had prepared into the Essence mansion. Mr. Federer was stunned by Charles's actions. "You have superpowers?" Charles nodded and said, "That's right, I am also an awakened." It was too troublesome to explain the difference between being awakened and being a cultivator to others. It was easier to let them believe his abilities were the result of an awakening. Seeing Charles move so much food into his storage space, Mrs. Federer asked, "Can you really carry so much?" Charles smiled. "I can take anything that can be found on our property." Mrs. Federer hesitated for a moment and said, "I still have some miscellaneous things around here. They're all worthless in a practical sense. If necessary, throw them away. But if you really have enough space, then please take them along with you." Charles knew that many among the older generation were very nostalgic. His parents should be able to keep some small things. He was afraid that they hadn't told him about this the previous time, because they hadn't wanted to drag him down. Mr. Federer's eyes grew mysterious. He returned to the house and brought out a large silver box. Charles did not even look at what was inside the box before storing it in the Essence mansion. "All right, we can go now. I have a car outside," Charles said. However, their path was blocked by a group of people. Charles looked at Yellowhair and the group behind him coldly. They held sharpened sickles and hoes. They did not look like they had come with good intentions. Yellowhair said proudly, "Don't think you can be arrogant just because you are stronger. If you don't kneel and apologize right now, this day will be your first death anniversary next year." "Oh?" Charles raised his eyebrows, then shifted his gaze to the man standing beside Yellowhair. "Are you sure you want to stand up for your dog?" Because Charles had not spent much time at home, he wasn't familiar with the townsfolk and didn't know who the man was. The man glanced at Alice, and his eyes glinted with desire, but he concealed it very well. Yellowhair was still furious. "How dare you scold me?" His words were strange. Charles thought, You're tough enough to kill someone, yet you can't bear others scolding you? Mr. Federer addressed the group. We are all neighbors. I have never done anything to offend anyone here. The clinic opened by my wife has helped a lot of people. What does everyone mean by doing this? Mr. Federer was a farmer. Mrs. Federer was a doctor. Although her clinic was small, she had indeed helped a lot of people. She knew many people did not have enough money for proper medical care. When they got sick, they just tried their best to hang on. She pushed down the prices of medicines again and again, and worked long hours for no extra pay. But now the townsfolk were an angry mob, set on violence. The man beside Yellowhair said, "You hit my cousin. Do you think I can just let it go? Whoever touches my cousin will lose his hand." Charles narrowed his eyes. "What if I refuse?" The man said, "Then I will have to do it myself." Charles looked at the villagers around him and confirmed, "Before we do it, I want to confirm what you mean." Yellowhair pointed at the car parked nearby and shouted, "This car is yours, right?" Charles nodded. "It's mine." Usually, whenever he came home, the townsfolk would be very kind to him. After all, he was the most promising person his age in the community. Charles bitterly recognized that many of these people had regularly visited his house to freeload off of his parents' generosity. Yellowhair's eyes lit up with joy. "Did you hear that? He admitted it. He admitted it!" At this point, the townsfolk were riled up to the point of hysteria. They jeered. "Federer, you are too much! You actually want to leave town and strike out on your own? We neighbors are supposed to help each other. Now that the world has become dangerous, you want to leave with your family? Your son has a car, but he doesn't want to take care of his neighbors? Let's judge him. What should we do with this kind of person? Kill them! Kill them!" Waves of condemnation repeatedly crashed against Charles and his family. Looking at everyone's excited, bloodthirsty expressions, Alice could not help but ask Charles, "Are these the simple and honest townsfolk you described?" Mr. Federer sighed and said, "Everyone is usually friendly because they know that they cannot survive alone. Moreover, everyone's standard of living is about the same. If they are diligent, they can live a better life. Those who cannot manage it are lazy. It is all their own fault." Charles had gone to a famous university. He did it all himself. Everyone was proud of him. But if you surpassed others too much, everyone feels resentful. They allow you to live a better life by relying on your own hard work. But if you succeed too greatly, they will think of a way to pull you back down to the same level as them. Before, they might have hidden this jealousy, but now they could express it freely. Seeing that everyone was excited, but still hesitant to fight, the man next to Yellowhair shouted, "Everyone, smash their car!" Hearing his words, everyone's eyes lit up. They still had some qualms about killing people. After all, Charles wasn't some heinous villain. Smashing a car seemed like a much lesser transgression. Thus, they picked up their farm implements and advanced on the vehicle. "Wind barrier," Charles yelled. Charles drew a wind barrier around the car. Then a strong, rebounding force threw the car about chaotically. Everyone was terrified. This was something that surpassed their understanding. The group of townsfolk yelled, "Ah! My arm! My leg! What's going on? Demon skills! He knows demon skills! Run! Everyone, don't panic! Big Polly will definitely be able to deal with him." The crowd, which had been ready to flee in all directions, suddenly calmed. They looked at the person in front with expectant eyes. Big Polly regarded Alice greedily, and then said righteously, "Everyone please rest assured. No matter who bullies you, I, Big Polly, will not sit by and do nothing." Alice's face turned red with anger. These people were clearly trying to smash their car. Why did he call Charles the bully? If Charles really let go and attacked them, none of these people would survive. Charles looked at Big Polly with a playful expression and said, "Seeing such a good car come in, you would rather smash it than take it for yourself. Are you some sort of giant baby? You're a big fish in a little pond, I can tell. Scared of the big bad world outside." Charles theorized that this person must have awakened his superpower, which would explain why he acted so confidently here in the little town. He must fear the possibility that, if he moved to a more populous area, there would be other awakens to threaten his position. Therefore, he had elected to trap all the people in the town here, so he could be the uncontested ruler. Big Polly's eyes filled with shame. It was galling to have his insecurities exposed. He said angrily, "No matter what you say, you have offended us. Prepare to die." As he spoke, a blade of white light flashed into existence in his hand. Charles called out to the assembled townsfolk. "There are troops outside organizing people to be evacuated to the protected military district. There are a large number of troops there to protect you. It is very safe." Hearing Charles's words, the townsfolk's eyes widened. Charles continued, "I've come back to tell everyone this news. You must evacuate as soon as possible. Otherwise, we will all be trapped in this place, and sooner or later, we will be trapped to death." Hearing this, the townsfolk's eyes grew even larger. Although there were not many dangers in the town, they'd encountered some worrying conditions. Moreover, the bugs outside had become alarmingly big. They all shared the fear that these bugs would suddenly start to eat people. Learning that there was a safe place, they were naturally very tempted to go. Panic flashed in Big Polly's eyes. He said loudly, "Everyone don't believe him. He's lying." As he spoke, he slashed the white blade at Charles with all his strength. His eyes were alight with ferocity. If he let these people find a true refuge, how could he maintain his position? This person who had inflamed the crowd's hopes must die. However, he suddenly felt the world spinning around him. He felt a sharp pain in his chest and was sent flying more than 30 feet away. He struggled to stand up, but Charles's blow had knocked all the strength from his body, rendering him unable to move. Charles's action shocked everyone. They didn't expect the superpowered Big Polly to be unable to withstand Charles's kick. Some of the onlookers panicked and prepared to retreat, but there were others with excitement glowing in their eyes. What if Charles really could bring them to a safe place? The townsfolk asked, "Is the safe place you just mentioned real? Where is the refuge? Why haven't we heard of it?" Everyone began to probe Charles for information. Although Charles had kicked Big Polly away, he had been suppressing his anger in full strength. The townsfolk felt confident that Charles was a pushover, and they didn't fear him. Charles pointed at a path. "Just walk south. The army will pass by here. You will intersect with them on this path, and they will take you to a safe place." Charles's words made everyone excited. If they had the promise of a safe place and the protection of the soldiers, why would they stay here and continue to be bullied by Big Polly? Charles said, "I came back to help Mom and Dad join the evacuation. Let's all go together." The townspeople cheered. "That's great! What a relief! Let's do it!" Just as everyone was cheering, Yellowhair's eyes narrowed into a vicious expression. He shouted, "The road is so dangerous. Why don't you share the car with everyone?" Everyone began to shout, "That's right! Your car can carry a few more people if you kick out the outsiders you brought with you. Leave the outsiders and take the townsfolk with you. What do the lives and deaths of outsiders have to do with us?" Hearing the shameless demands, Mr. and Mrs. Federer's faces turned pale with anger. Had these people forgotten what was right and what was wrong? Charles was willing to tell them about a safe place and the way to get there. As always, when people received some help, they demanded more and more. Charles moved to the center of the crowd and patiently explained, "Don't panic, everyone. We don't have room for so many people at once. Don't many of you have tractors at home? You can all carry extra people. If you really want to use my car, I will come back to pick you up after I get my parents safely there." Someone shouted, "Who knows if we can survive until then?" Another replied, "Yes, we need to take the car. We need to go first." As he spoke, he threw a hoe at Charles's head. Seeing that her son was in danger, Mrs. Federer shouted anxiously, "Charlie!" They hadn't seen that Charles, who had his back to them, had a smile on his face. The hoe struck, and Charles fell to the ground. "Charles!" Alice cried. "Master!" Sylvia yelled. Alice and Sylvia hadn't expected Charles to be taken down. They hurried forward and prepared to use their healing techniques. The crowd, believing that they had killed someone, shouted, "Kill the rest of them and take the car!" More weapons struck Charles's body as others prepared to attack his companions, including Alice. Alice yelled, "All of you get back!" A strong current of water dispersed the crowd. Alice anxiously rushed to Charles's side. Sylvia immediately cast her holy light on Charles's body to treat him. They were shocked to find that, although Charles's clothes were torn, he was actually not injured. Charles's physical fitness was too advanced. These people could not hurt him at all. Then what was he doing just now? Putting on a show? Charles was indeed putting on an act, but not for the townsfolk's benefit. He was acting for his parents. His parents were kind and gentle, and it had been very difficult for them to adjust to the new reality of the apocalypse. The rules of society had changed dramatically, becoming much harsher. Charles knew the fastest way to make his parents accept the requirements of this cruel new order was to make them sad. Due to his parents' influence, Charles had not despaired about human nature when musclehead Connor Mills had pushed him into the swarm of blood-devouring ants. He had believed that Connor had just made a mistake, and that there were only a few people who had gone bad. However, when his father had died in front of him, he had realized that his actions affected not only himself, but the people around him. It might be admirable that he adhered to his principles, but it was unforgivable to involve his family. He could not let his family bear the consequences of his deeds. Therefore, when he gauged the hostile mood of the townsfolk, he decided to put on a little show. When Mr. and Mrs. Federer saw him fall, they felt that the sky was about to collapse. This was their child. They would rather die than see anything happen to him. However, due to their instinct to compromise and believe the best of people, Charles had apparently died by the mob's hands. When they saw Alice's and Sylvia's reactions, hope bloomed again in their hearts. Could they really save their son's life with their fantastic magical powers? Charles opened his eyes and stood up with feigned difficulty, looking fiercely at the people around him. After being scattered by Alice's water magic, their hearts were filled with fear. Only now did they realize what they had done. They had offended people with superpowers. 3 of them. Now they felt their legs go weak, and they couldn't even beg for mercy. Alice threw herself onto Charles and cried, "You almost died. What would I do without you?" Charles was a little surprised by Alice's adaptable acting skills. He patted Alice's back, then stood up and walked toward Yellowhair with killing intent. Yellowhair fell to his knees with a thud. He was so scared that tears flowed down his face as if from a faucet. "I didn't do it on purpose. I really didn't do it on purpose." "Go to hell," Charles yelled. A ball of fire shot from Charles's hand and burned Yellowhair into ashes. Although it was a bit of a waste to use the fire-repelling talisman against an ordinary person, it was necessary to make the killing less bloody and easier to bear for his parents. More balls of flame flew out from his hand one after another, burning up all of the underlings behind Yellowhair in a matter of seconds. Charles wanted to continue fighting, but Mrs. Federer yelled, "Charlie, stop!" She could not bear it. "I know these people are all bastards, but their families are innocent. If you kill them all, what will happen to their families?" Her heart had filled with despair when she saw her son fall. However, she could not let these people's families suffer the pain of losing their loved ones. It was not just a question of emotional pain. These people were the pillars of their households, the providers and defenders. If they fell, their families would fall as well. Hearing the kind woman's plea, the remaining townsfolk all begged for mercy. The crowd cried, "I'm sorry. We are all people with wives and children. We were all just muddle-headed for a moment. That's right. If it wasn't for our responsibilities, we wouldn't have acted so desperately. We've already apologized to you. Please forgive us." "That's right. We are sorry." Everyone was kneeling on the ground. The people who had been shouting at and trying to kill Charles now had pitiful looks on their faces, as if they themselves had suffered some great grievance. Angered, Charles addressed the crowd. "When you tried to kill me just now, why didn't you consider that I also have parents? If I didn't have such strength, would my whole family have been killed by you? So you have an old man to take care of in your family, or you have a wife and children. Does that mean you can abuse others and kill them? And you have the nerve to kneel and beg?" Charles knew that if he had been unable to protect them, his parents and Alice would have been killed by the mob. Now they presented themselves as weak victims and demanded forgiveness. It was pathetic and ridiculous. Charles had not expected that the once simple and honest townsfolk would have changed so much, so quickly. Reeling from Charles's accusation, everyone's eyes flashed with shame and anger. They had been defeated, chastised, and humiliated. It was only because of the devil's strength that they didn't dare to show it. Charles's tone became a little gentler.
He pointed at the kneeling people and said to Alice, "Do you see their eyes? They still feel angry and justified in their actions." Alice's feelings were very complicated. Under Charles's guidance, she had broken through her own moral bottom line time and time again. She did not doubt that if these people had an opportunity to take revenge on Charles in the future, they would seize it without mercy, just because they've been publicly shamed. Alice was not the only one struggling with her emotions. Charles's parents and students felt that something in their hearts had been subverted. If Charles didn't have superpowers, if Alice and Sylvia didn't have healing abilities, then what would have happened today? They did not dare to think any further. Charles gathered his group, got them into the car, and took off.